Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero Game where we code to complete. Oh, wow. Show where we code to complete game on stream. Yeah, it's going to be that kind of day, I can tell. We are right in the middle right now of just fixing up sort of the way we do asset lookups. We never really had anything in particular for this. We made sort of a tag lookup system at the very early on, and we never really revisited it. And so now that I'd like to start kind of being able to put I'd like to be able to go through really straightforwardly adding asset stuff. And there was just a bunch of things that were obviously not very good about how it was working. And so all I really wanted to do was take a look at what would be required to simplify, just make it easy for us to add lots of assets and make it easy for stuff to work the way we want it to work. And so all we're doing right now is changing from a system where we passed very very large floating point vectors, if this makes sense, which were just completely generalized into something that's much simpler. So now what we're doing is we're basically passing something that's going to be very discrete and which is, tailored to the assets we actually have rather than when we first started where we didn't have any idea. So we just had to kind of put something in to get started. And that was, of course, why we didn't do anything fancy with it originally, was just because before you actually know what's going on with your assets, you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to optimize the system to look them up or whatever, because if you spend all that time, once you then find out what your assets actually look like in the end, you're going to find that you optimized for the wrong thing, right? So now that we have some idea of what we're doing, we kind of know what we would need in terms of and we saw this last time, we more or less know what we need in terms of flexible lookup versus rigid lookup, right? So we have sort of two types of things we need to do. One type of thing is a very concrete, discrete, exact lookup. And that's just something okay, I know that I'm making the walls of the orphanage, so I want to be able to uniquely identify things that are from the wall of the orphanage, right? And so the way we do that is we use the asset tag hash now, and you can see, if I center my keyboard properly here, asset tag hash, you can see that these are just now 64-bit values, and these 64-bit values, they come from a set of functions here that can generate those by taking a bunch of tags. So we used to have these various tags. It can take a bunch of tags, and it will sort of conglomerate them into a single U64 and produce this value directly from that. And so when you think about what's going on here, we're replacing a system where we used to pass these very large vectors with ones in a few places and it had to be weighted and so on, by just saying, okay, what we're going to do instead is we're just going to use ordered sets of tags. We're going to mush those into a 64-bit value. That 64-bit value is going to be a unique identifier for a family of assets, and those assets are then going to be matched. So we will spin over a few assets. We are going to look at the assets that match this 64-bit value for matching in one or two other categories that are more flexible, meaning we don't know exactly what's in there. And those will be things like facing direction and variant are two of the things that we know we'll have. We might have others, but we know we'll have those. And in fact, at the moment, we already have those defined here, as you can see in this asset match vector element. We currently only use two floating point values now, and we don't necessarily even use both of them, right? But we're going to use up to two. And those get matched in a fuzzy way. So the artist, for example, can make these as dense as they want them to be. So if an artist wants to input more facing directions for a character, like this like if a character wanted 8 facing directions instead of 4, instead of 1, right? You could have a thing that can only ever face one direction, right? So no matter what direction it's moving, it only faces. We want the ability to like dynamically change that resolution without the game having to think about it. So we don't want the game code essentially to know anything about that, right? We don't want the game code to have to think, oh, for each art asset, I have to have a like knowledge in the code of how its facing directions were laid out. So what we've essentially done here, right, is we've condensed those the sort of entirely fuzzy matching from the previous way we were doing it ever since the beginning of Handmade Hero. We've condensed that down into now a very specific way of looking up assets, and then still retained a little bit, just the amount of the fuzzy matching that we think we will actually use. And the reason we wanted to do that was because A, it's much more straightforward. So now when I'm coding those parts of the game, which is what we're about to do, like we're gonna wanna start putting all these assets in, right? And like, I wanna be able to like start putting stuff around the orphanage and the different characters, the different monsters. I wanna be able to put those in the game. I don't wanna be sitting around trying to make these huge vectors and match them with fuzzy, like I just want to know, okay, I'm specifying this thing uniquely. And then the only things I want to be fuzzy are things that I legitimately don't care what they map to, right? So facing direction and variant are examples of not caring what something maps to, because we know that it's just, look, we're telling you some random number between 0 and 1 for the variant, and a facing direction between 0 and pi, probably 2 pi. I think that's what we did, 0 to 2 pi for facing direction. So when we pass those down, right, what we know is that we're sending the data we need exactly what the game code knows and wants is being specified to the asset system, and then the asset system will take care of the rest. And so that makes it exactly split the way I want. So that's one reason. The second reason is because this will be much faster. So once we start piling tons of assets into the game, the list of assets will get very long. And before, we were literally walking through like all of the body assets and matching it, right? It was like an ON per lookup, and it just wouldn't have scaled very well, right? Now we have a hash table that will cut down the actual identification of which subsets of assets might match into a very small number. So depending on how wide we make that hash table, we can cut it down dramatically to basically only assets that are in that facing direction or that variant set. And since we know we're only ever going to have 4 facing directions, maybe 8 tops if for some particular monster type that really has a lot of facing direction or something, and no more than, say, like 16 variants of anything, and we don't really do variants for facing direction at the moment, we know that we're not going to have to loop through many elements, right? We're going to be able to look at elements very quickly. And furthermore, because we have control over that hash table that gets built at load time, we should also be able to accelerate that if we needed to. So we can make it just be a linked list that hops through assets in a fairly slow way, and that may not ever cost us much because we just don't have to hop through very many elements. But if we find that there are, 32 or 64 elements in some of these chains, what we can do is we can aggregate the matching values for those into arrays that we pre-allocate that are all together. We can load up the entire set of match values in like 2 or 3 SIMD block reads, right? So just like, literally 3 or 4 memory accesses, 1 cache line, right? Of 64 bytes could have all the values like quantized or something. Then we could do the match right there in one operation that produces the correct index out of there, and then we just look that one up, right? So the fuzzy matching, condensing that down so that we're matching only against a set of very well-known discrete groups means that I don't have any concerns about scaling this up at all, because we should be able to handle any amount of asset complexity dumped into this system, because now we know that for all of the complexity that occurs on the side of what asset you're loading, that is now effectively can be made instant. And then the matching is also arranged in a way that I'm not scared about scaling it up to 32, 64 possible entries, which should be more than enough because we can always make the hash table wider. So any given asset match shouldn't really get much above that, right? So off we go. So now what we want to do is just finish. What we did is we created some code for doing all this stuff. We haven't finished actually porting stuff that uses it. So here you can kind of see in here we've got this adding tags to the entity here where it's putting these on there. I do like the way that that's working, but I don't necessarily like the fact that it's happening on the entity specifically. And the reason for that is because entities are not really where these tags get stored anymore. The reason for that is we no longer actually want to specify per entity tags. What we want to do is specify per piece tags, because we want entities to be able to grab pieces from multiple different asset types, right? Because pieces of entities, it's fine if you want to say that all of the pieces in an entity are all the same asset type. But we don't really want to force that. We want to be able to have like an entity comprised of pieces that come from anywhere. Is this a puss I hear? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Hello, sweet puss. What's going on? What's going on? Come on up. Do you want to say hi to everyone on the stream? Do you want to say hi? How you doing? What's going on? You just mousing around this morning? You came up here, you opened the door all by yourself. I think you've done a good job learning how to open that door. Yeah. That's a good puss. That's a good puss. What's going on? What do you think? You know I can't really program when you're on my shoulder, though, unfortunately. And this is a problem with task chairs. So let me just say one thing out there. For anybody who has product design experience, this is a product that I desperately want, and I do not know anything about product design, so I cannot make it. But I need a chair, like a task chair attachment, or just a task chair itself that I can buy, that has like a thing right here to support the puss. Even just like a little thing that comes in here. Oh no, don't edit the code, Molly. So basically when the puss is up here, right, I could actually start working, but I need to support her legs, right? You see how I'm doing this with my shoulder, like right here, I have to keep my arm up. So I could do something one-handed just fine with my left hand, but I can't type with two hands because one arm is dedicated to support the puss. You know what I'm saying? And so what I want is I want some way of supporting the puss so she can stay on my shoulder, which is where she always wants to be if she can. She would just like live on the shoulder. Support the puss's hind legs so she can just stay on my shoulder while I code. And then she's happy, I'm happy, everything's good. And I'd probably code better because it's great having a puss around. They help with your coding when you can actually code. You know what I'm saying? So it needs to be something that would support, the puss out there. Yeah, I thought about a baby pouch, but I don't know if it would work because it's not really on a shoulder, right? So I don't know if it would satisfy her. I could try ordering a baby pouch, and she could be like here or something, but I don't know if a baby pouch would do it. I've had that same thought, believe me. I just don't. It's not really putting her in the position she wanted to be in, so I don't think she would stay. But I don't know. Another thing would be if it was back here, she could curl around your neck. She would probably do that too, but she likes being up, So I don't know. Don't eat my... Oh, baby, those are my headphones. Don't eat my headphones. Okay, go. Excuse me, I gotta put the headphones away. She always eats my headphones if they're left out. Anyway, that is a product I very much would love to have. So if somebody out there knows how to make that happen, I will be your very first customer. When the Kickstarter goes up for like Task Cat or whatever it's going to be, I will be the very first backer, and I will back like the highest level. Okay. So, thank you in advance, whoever's going to make that. That's great. We need that. So what I was saying here is what I want is effectively an asset tag, like aggregator. So what I want to be able to do here is just say, okay, so like when we're doing generation code, like we're doing here, what I'd like to be able to do is do something where, and we sort of have in the gen code, right, there's this like gen entity idea, and there's this gen entity tag with tags of 4. And you can see here, like it was kind of set up to push these things on in the first place. What I don't super understand, though, is why it's baked into here. I guess because we never really needed to pull it out. This is something that I think we just want to have, right, in general. We don't need these F32 values here anymore, really. Well, I mean, maybe we do. That's a little bit hard to say. But what I'm basically suggesting here is inside this, like, instead of having it be raw, we want, like, a gen entity tag bundle. I don't know. Something like this, where these are placed. Something like this. And that way, when we go through and build these tags, we can create one of these. Like, this is what I want to do, right? I want to create one of these, and then I just want to push, like, tags on it incrementally. So when I do add tag in here, when I have this tag builder, it would be more like this, right? So this is how I actually wanted to do it. Where instead of pushing it onto an entity, which is now not really a thing we would do, instead we're going to push it onto a tag builder. And then when we actually are done, so when we have all of the tags on this thing that we need, then we would just, finalize those tags effectively, right? So we would push the tags on, we would then go to here where we're about to build them, and we would just say, like, finalize tags here. So it'd just be like this. Oops. Now, the only thing I'm not sure about is where exactly the asset type would flow in here. When you do add piece, you're supposed to pass it the full, the entity piece asset thing. And you can see that that's like the hash plus the variant, right? And so in this case, we don't really have a variant. And so we would need something that produces the tags like this, right? Or maybe this. And it would presumably be able to do that. So you can see we have here the helper function that does that from these. We would just have one, an equivalent one that generates it from, in addition to generating it from the tags laid out like this, it would generate it from the tag builder. So when we say get piece asset, what we need to do here is we need to also say what, in this case, I believe it's always scenery. So we would say like that it's asset scenery. We would pass the tag builder, and then we would pass the variant here, except I don't think that we have variants in this part of the code, meaning this part of the code never bothers passing down a variant anyway. One thing that I would suggest is it probably just, we never thought of that, but we probably want there to be one. So we probably want this to be like a random unilateral here that takes the entropy the world entropy stream and just sets like these pieces to have random variants, because that way if the artist sticks more for any piece of scenery that we ask for, if the artist happens to stick variants into the system, they'll be used. I have to trim. Molly's back nails really need a trim. Check out. She tried to crawl up on me. Look at, I've got the like scratch bleed to prove it. She's a very sweet puss, and she never scratched you on purpose, but sometimes when she slips, she extends her like, you know, back or front nails, and she tries to grab to not slip, and you get a good old scratch on you. We try to keep her nails trimmed short, but you know, she sharpens them quickly. Let's put it that way. So I think this is roughly what we want here. My only question about it at this point is whether or not we actually have to order these in any particular way. So you can kind of see here that we've got them ordered pretty strongly. It's always like wall or floor comes first, and then like wood, stone, or grass comes next. And so we're actually already adding them in the order they appear. And like I said before, we could do work in the asset system to deorder tags, meaning that any set of tags can match in any order, meaning you don't have to put them in the same order they appear in here. But actually, I think I want it this way because I may want this to be... I may want to use order as a thing at some point. I don't know that I will, but I might. So I'm not going to add that in yet, and I'm going to see whether it's fine doing it this way. In other words, if you said, like, orphan earth was different than earth orphan, like in English, word order matters. In this case, maybe the tag order should also have that, and I just don't know. So I don't want to say for sure that that's the right thing, because I don't know. But I do just kind of want to, yeah, I kind of want to leave that be for now. Like I don't want to push that. So you can see we've got a tag builder here, and this tag builder was in the asset system, right? And we may be able to regularize these. We may be able to bake these together. I'm not actually sure, but I don't care about that right now, so I'm not going to really look at that. I just want to take a look at the various add tag functions we have here. So this is the gen entity one. This is the one that we're presumably not really going to be using anymore. So instead, this is the one that would take the tag builder. So this would take... Sorry, I'm so slow today. So this is the one that would take the gen entity tag builder, so this one right here. That will always use this, like so. And it doesn't need the F32 value because that's just not related, right? So it will take the builder, it will use the builder to push a tag on to the set, like so. And it doesn't need the value here because there is no such thing as the value. Now, we may want to do something like this, and that would just be something that allows you to snuggle the variant in here. So we could do something like, you know, oh, there's facing direction and variant are in here, but I don't think we really want that necessarily. I mean, maybe we do. Sometimes we do want to specify that facing direction, and so, you know, I'm not sure. It's hard to say. If you go look... at the way we would have to do that. Facing direction is kind of tricky because it kind of wants to come from the entity itself, but you can imagine wanting facing directions to be specified rigidly for things like scenery assets that can face multiple directions that are just stationary. And so I don't really know what you would do with that, but I suspect what we would want to do with that is you would actually want that not to be specified on the tag builder, but rather to be specified on the entity. So in other words, you would probably do something like this, where you have the facing direction specified, and then the entity type itself, when you look at that, is going to have a facing direction, and that facing direction would just be specified here, specifically, right? At some point, we've got to, like, port fully to, like, F32s instead of R32s, right? So, yeah. But anyway, so if you imagine moving forward from here, we would say that the facing direction went on the gen entity. I'm not sure why gen create entity is... Oh, because it's a pound define. I was like, well, that's not why it's not highlighted. So the gen entity tag builder, we would have one of those plus a facing direction in here, like so. And then anytime anyone was specifying something from that, they would specify it by specifically targeting the tag builder, right? So in this case, where we're doing something like place cat, and this needs to add a tag for cat on here, right? Instead of result, it's going to be like result tags. But that's it. And then, of course, we don't need the 1.0 anymore. And that'd be true for any of these things. And then when we have facing direction like this, where you're going to specify the facing direction, like I was saying before, that would actually be like a tag specifier. So the facing direction would actually be specified thus, right? So I think that's basically what we would need. Is not a member. That's a good point. I meant that. So I think that's all we would really need, and now it's just a question of churning through the code and basically porting this old code that we had and making it work properly, right? Okay. I think that's it. I don't know why that looks like this. We don't need the gen to be passed anymore, so all of that should be fine. In fact, all of these are now more simple because they don't actually require any of that stuff. The orphan name tag here does go second. So again, I'm seeing mostly what's happening is the tags are already they already appear to be going in the order that we would want them to appear. So it seems like we don't really have much work to do there, and so that again suggests that maybe we just don't care about making the order non-specific. So that seems fine. We've got some like test code here that was adding some scenery. We'll go ahead and put that in there. I really do want to know, and at this point, I've got a. Oops, this one is actually just a facing direction. I really do have to take a look at my list of things here. I don't remember where it ended up, but I had a set of things that needed to get looked at. Here it is. And I just have to make sure that all of that... It looks like the mark vertical got done already, but I need to go ahead and churn through my list here of 4-coder things that are still there. And it looks like yeah, I've got this on my list with the token movements. So the token movements are still kind of busted, so when I delete something, it deletes way too much. Yeah. But I've done most of these. So we're almost there on the editor side of things. We're almost there, but not quite. I'll have to remember to look at some of those. I'll talk to Ryan about it. We're still waiting for Alan to ship the new 4-coder beta, so I think Ryan and I are both kind of waiting. We both contributed some code, some new code stuff to it, and we're just waiting for that to actually get baked. So I don't know what the status is of that. Hopefully not too long for a new 4-coder, but we'll see. Anyway, So again, just these are pretty straightforward, right? We're just gonna change these so that the tags get added on these little tag builder things. You can see here, like so. And I think that's all we really needed. This now needs to get written, because it hasn't been, right? I'm not sure what this is about. I don't know why this got highlighted, actually. Does anybody else know why? I have to go over there to read it. Although I still just read it at the bottom. I shouldn't have done that. Function does not take 3 arguments. Get entity at traversable does not take 3 arguments. Really? Where is that function? So somehow get entity at traversable is not found. How is that possible that there can be no matches when it's actually highlighted? Like, it has to be somewhere, right? So it seems a little weird that there isn't one. One would assume that get entity at traversable exists in here somewhere, like in the sim region, for example, is where I would probably expect it to be. That's really strange. So, how is it possible that this is found by the indexer, but 4coder literally can't find it? Right? Is that just a bug? So let's take a look. What's the actual code? Hold on a second. The strings and then the path, right? Get entity at traversable. Well, it didn't find it. So how? So what? So this must not actually. But it says right there, see declaration of get entity at traversable, right? I'm so confused right now. Also, this one compiled. Oh, wow, I'm typing it wrong. Oh, it's a slow day. All right, so the question here is just what does it actually need? And it needs, in this case, yeah. Rip. So anyway, this needs the base hash. So it's just wants, in addition to the thing it's standing on, right? When it actually does a gen entity at that, it needs to know what the actual tags are. So you can see here, like the get tree tags bit is going on. We don't actually, so the only thing about that is it doesn't use that, right? So we actually don't care what this pass is, as far as I know, because it doesn't actually add, oh, it does. No, it does. Add tag lamp. So it does actually want that. So we can actually do, we can say get asset piece, or get piece asset, right? So that's not true. We can say, look, we wanted a tag lamp. It's scenery. And we just didn't have anything else. There wasn't anything else in here, right? So it was just a tag lamp, and off it goes. Now, there is one sort of weirdness there, which is to say that I don't actually know the tags file, right? So if we go into base game and we look at what lamp has. So we look here, you can see that it's the orphan lamp that's being placed here. So there's orphan lamp and orphan lamp large, for example. And so I don't know to what extent we want that to remain, but presumably we do want to specify that in its entirety. And whether we want to be large or not, I suppose, is irrelevant. But we at least need to specify those two things. If we then look over here at the next problem we've got, we don't want that one. These should all be basically the same. So here we're placing we're placing the actual entities in here. This again, this part, which was being done previously, is now like doesn't even need to exist anymore because we can do it in one go. So this is just going to be a get piece asset call that passes in that tag builder, right? So the pending entity tags will get passed to that for get piece asset. And that's all we'll need. The only thing we don't know here is what type of entity this actually is, right? So that part is a little confusing. Like when we do gen entity at traversable and it passes that in, it doesn't know which one this is. So presumably for this case, we would pass asset none, and then the asset itself gets filled in, right? Late by the actual gen code when it puts in the different asset base types, like the body and the head or whatever else it needs. So I think that's more or less what we're doing. And so then the only question here is like, where, we got to write this function, but that's basically it. So in gen entity, where that code is here, gen or entity gen, and we've got that call to do get piece asset, we kind of just need entity piece asset here again. And it's the same code as this. It's just, it also needs the variant, right? So that get piece asset call, which exists here, will default to being the 0 variant, doesn't matter. So when we actually have the call that passes the asset basic category and then the tag builder, so the gen entity tag builder, and then the variant. Oh no, the variant's already on there. All we need to do is just sort of feed this forward, right? So we just need to say like, okay, if this is what you're producing, then the result is just going to be a call to the more explicit version that passes cat and then passes the 4 tags that exist, right? And since those tags will be initialized to asset none anyway, we don't actually have to worry about that part. Because we'll just be passing, the 0 value through as we go. So that's pretty much it. And yeah, if forecoder is completely broken right now, like I said, we're still waiting for Alan to fix it. So the indentation is just completely broken. And I have no idea why. I believe Ryan said it had something to do with the fact that like there was some call that it was making about parentheses that was like, that maybe the forecoder flurry code was not returning the right value. So it may actually not be that forecoder is broken, it's like the customization layer is broken. I still don't know. So again, waiting for that. I was really hoping for that this week, but maybe next week I'll bug Alan about it and see where we're at. So I think that's all we need for that. We've got some complaint here about, so we don't need these to be indirected anymore. These can just be direct, right? So when we're actually doing these gen entity tags, none of this is all nonsense, right? That doesn't have to happen anymore. And so when we're adding tags to the tag builder, we can just add them, right? So we can just do this. And we don't need it to be fancy anymore. And so in theory, this will just work now. Get piece asset. It has a basic category, the tag builder. Oh, and I forgot the variant override. So in this case, we do want a way to override the variant probably. Although actually, no. Why would we do that? We don't really need that. So instead what we should do here is just set that variant, right? So we should say like tag builder variant equals random unilateral, right? Like if we want that, we should just set it before we make the call. That seems better, right? Okay. With entity visible piece here, where we're adding this piece in, again, this is just pretty straightforward. I think this just wants to be reorganized slightly so that we add the piece after the fact. Here we can get the asset tag directly. We don't have to use a builder for any particular reason. So what we can actually do is just roll these all into the one call. So we can just say like get piece asset. It's a block that's a floor grass block. And that's it, right? And we can pass variants to these if we want later, but at the moment I suppose we don't really need to, although maybe we should. If we look here at adding the tree tags, that's been replaced by get tree tags. And so if we do a get tree tags and pass that along, that just produces the thing we actually needed. So when we do gen entity at P, we just pass that result of that produces the tags we wanted, and then we're done. We need to now look at anything else. That's all our compile errors. We're not out of the woods yet because we haven't actually written all the code that we need. That's like a nominal port, but the asset system is not actually going to be putting anything into this tag hash. So if we ran the game now, it would just roll over and die because it doesn't have any way to access like any assets at all, right? So if you imagine us, running it here, all we're gonna do is, and you can see, we're just gonna get garbage out of here, and we're not gonna find any assets for anything. So let me switch to a debug build here, just so we can get our errors better. But what we're gonna have to do now is when we start loading assets, we have to actually put them into the hash. You know what I'm saying? So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly why this is failing in this way. So it might be interesting to just kind of look at what's happening here. It could be that somebody's not properly returning like a cleared value when they should. So it might be nice to just, take a quick look at that and figure out what's going on, just to remove a bug, even though we know that this shouldn't work. It shouldn't fail in quite that way, I don't think. So I'd rather just be clear about it, right? So if we take a look here, when it passes the piece cube UV layout into here, that's going to call get bitmap with this ID. And that ID is the second thing passed, right? So the thing that it's looking for here is this bitmap ID. So it's passing a 0 bitmap ID. So in here where it says get bitmap with an ID of 0, I feel like that texture handle should not be returning a is valid, because 0 should never be valid. To be fair, I suppose it should never actually be calling this. Like, if the ID 0, it should just skip this altogether, presumably. But now that we have a case where that's actually happening, I kind of want to figure out what this should do and do it, right? So if we look at what's going on with this and we call getAsset with 0, right? The ifAsset call here should produce hopefully a null pointer is what we would want. So what you can see here is that it wouldn't do that because it's actually passing a getAsset of 0 will actually just give you the 0th asset, which presumably, I don't know why we would necessarily do that. Maybe we wanted to produce a null asset. The problem with producing a null asset is I'm not sure what happens at that point when you then ask for like the texture handle, right? Which would be this thing. But presumably it should just be all zeros there anyway. So what we may want to do in this case is we may want to spend a little bit of time making sure, like, if we actually return a null asset, that it actually works. So what probably happened here was somebody like loaded one of these things in. So, like, I'm going to do this real quick because I want to see what happens. Just to see, right? And just eliminating the union part of this. Yeah. So I think the problem here is that the null, so you can see where we run into trouble. If we make these a union, then the problem is that the null asset being the 0th asset always creates a problem for us, specifically because of the fact that it doesn't know which of these you're actually using. So it can't produce the correct null version of each of these, which is probably what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and say that for now, we'll just let that stand because it's totally fine. They're not particularly large. Like if you look at loaded font, I don't think it's like, there's really not much in there. So having this be the asset control structure is fine with me. I do think, like, to do, in the end, we probably want to make separate asset structs for each of these because they are handled so differently now. It may not make a whole lot of sense to have a single large asset type. But that seems fine. There's really not a lot else that needs to happen in order for us to run because now we run just fine, right? So I think that was all that the problem was, and we'll leave it at that. All right, so now we need to actually add assets into the asset hash table, because if we don't do that, then we're not actually going to be able to do anything, right? Like if we don't add the asset, if we don't add assets into the assets by tag hash, then we won't ever find any when we look. So that's the part that we need to actually take care of. I don't know why this says, does this need to be a prime hash? Because we know that it doesn't need to be a prime hash since we're using an actual hash function now, right? We're using a strong hash function, very strong. This should be pretty close to random bit distribution. And we can verify that, but, you know, we know we can make this be basically random bit distribution. So we shouldn't need this to be a prime hash for any reason, because the only reason you ever would make a hash table be a prime number of entries is if your hash function itself is weak. So if the thing that you're using to hash the inputs is weak, then the bits won't be randomly distributed. And so having there be a prime number of entries in the hash makes it so that when you do the modulus, you're not biasing towards certain bits in the input. But if you know that all of your bits are evenly distributed in the hash anyway, then you don't ever need that. So how do you verify that? Well, it's pretty easy for us to later, we could count how many assets go into each of these, and we can actually look and see if we can just take a histogram basically and see if they are, right? So we can verify that later. Anyway. So what we want to do is fill out this assets by tag. So in this first asset of type nonsense here, what we want to do is in first asset of type, let me just look for first asset of type. What we're doing is inserting, like we're inserting into that, right? So if you look at like set asset type, for example, we want this to now be a more general version, right? And you can see here, we're talking about it, right? And so what we want to do is actually just have a like update hash, you know, we want like an update hash for this thing, right? That's what we want. So we want to get rid of first asset, and the only place that was being used in the asset lookup. So now what we want to do is some way of making this, like we want to look at all the places that use it, right? So we want to look at all of the call sites for set asset type, and we want to figure out how to make that work. So you can see here, like here's where we're loading, right? So this just is where we load all of the asset metadata. So in here, this is one place where we would do it, right? We've loaded all the tags, and you know, off we would go. And then here's another place where we would do it, and this is where we update the actual asset metadata, where we say, you know, here's what's going on. So I think what we want to do is just change this, and we want to do something like this. We want to say like update asset hash table, right? And we want to pass the assets, we want to pass the asset index that we're trying to update, and then we need some way of sending it like tags. We need to send it the tags that we actually have, right? And what you can see here is this actually does a bunch of tag appending here, like you can see it, you know, doing this thing. And it looks to see whether the tags differ. And then it does some updating to like add the tags in, like here, right? And so what we may want, and I don't really know, but what we may want to do here is remove an asset from the hash table at the head of this and then insert it to the hash table later. So what we may want is two calls, remove asset from hash, like so, and we would say this, right? We can preserve this error check because apparently this is an error check we care about, right? So we'd say remove this asset from the hash table, and if it doesn't exist in the hash table at the moment, that's fine too, right? And then later down here, what we can do is say, once we're done with all of it, add it back in, right? So we can remove it from the hash table, we can add it to the hash table, and then what we would do is the other place that this gets called, we would only add it, right? And this is the global asset index, is what we cared about there, and off we go. So now we just need that function, right? we need to be able to, instead of doing set asset type, which is not a thing we would do anymore, we have a remove asset from hash, which takes the, asset index, and an add asset to hash. And these are like, functions that work together. And so we remove asset from hash. There we go. And so then our only problem is we now have to actually figure out how to write this function, which is nominally pretty easy, but there is one sort of nasty element to it, which is that we've never actually tried to load tags out of the tag set for an asset and actually build one of our internal tag hashes from it. So we need to kind of go learn how that works. And so when we remove an asset from a hash, or when we add an asset to the hash, they're both going to use, presumably, the same function to compute the hash offset, which is to say they're going to spin through the asset set and find that asset hash. So when we look, and this get asset from, this right here where we do the hash 32 mod assets by tag, so that right there presumably also wants to be a value, like get asset hash slot, like that. And this function here would be something that takes one of these tag hashes like this, and produces the hash slot in question. So that probably wants to be this sort of thing. We would return the result is the hash slot. And that way everyone is using the same computation, right? So we know that it's uniform. We don't have to worry about like how that's working. So everyone here would do the same thing, right? We'd all say, well, if we're going to add an asset to the hash, we need to get the asset hash slot. But what you can see is we don't have one of these. So the other piece of the puzzle is we need a way to get that hash slot from an actual asset. Something like that, right? So we would expect this to do something. Probably it will call this from like this tag hash, right? This is the part we don't know. And everyone's going to call this. So again, I'm just setting this up so that everyone can share the code, so we only have to write it once. And in both these cases, what we need to do is modify the hash itself. So when we say get asset from hash slot, we're then going to loop through, and we can see that code, in fact, right here, when it's doing the checking, right? So it would look a little bit like this. We'd load out the first one. We would loop through like so, exactly the way this was doing. Oops, this is in the wrong function. There we go. So we loop through, and we would try to find the asset that we're looking for, right? Now, we would know that we only need to find the asset that we're actually that we're pointing to, right? So because we're just looking for this, and we just want to undo the this is basically a chain, right? So the hash table is basically just a chain of assets that fall into that slot. So all we're trying to do is get rid of it, right? We're just trying to get it out of that chain. So we just need a pointer to the previous index slot, right? Or the previous slot. And so if we say this is what we're actually looking for, so we want the previous slot here to point to whatever this thing is, right? We want to look and say, while the previous slot is not equal to the asset index, we're good, right? And we also want to make sure that previous slot actually exists, right? Because if we get to 0, I mean, another way to do this is while there's a previous slot and it's not equal to asset index, we keep going, right? And so I think we just want this. And if we, at the end, if the prev slot is not a 0 value, then all we would have to do, and we kind of want to, we kind of want to grab this as well, again. Right, but you can see what I'm doing. So take a pointer to whatever this previous slot is. The location of the previous slot. We then say, while there is something there, so while it is pointing to an asset, and it's not pointing to the asset we actually want to remove, then what we do is we go one forward. And we point to the next pointer, the next index, in the slot, the one more down the chain. Eventually, we're either going to run out of links in the chain, meaning this asset was never in the hash to begin with, or we're going to find somebody's next pointer that points to this asset. And if we've found that, then what we need to do, first of all, if we found that, it should always, if we claim we found it, it should always be the one we were looking for, because that's the only way we should have been able to end without it being 0. We will then look up the asset that, oh, we don't even need to do that. So then we will just say, the asset that we're pointing to, we want to just take its next pointer and blast it over the thing that was pointing to it, right? So we're removing it from the chain. So this is presumably all we need to remove ourselves from the hash, right? And if we weren't in the hash, no big deal. To add to the hash, it's way, 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 way simpler, right? All we have to do is see whether there's anything we need to link. And if there is, we link. Otherwise, we just cold write it. So let's suppose we say, all right, we've got the hash slot in question. Is there something in there? If there is, then we have to chain ourselves. Oops, I guess we'll call this next. Then we have to chain it in here. So what we would say is like, okay, let's get the asset to which that corresponds. This, by the way, should be that. Oh, no, we don't have to do this. What am I talking about? We can just do this one. So we'll just get the asset that we're adding, right? And we should probably assert that asset index is not equal to 0, because we don't ever want to insert the null. Like, the null asset should never really be in the hash. So unless we want to do that sometime in the future, I'd like to know if anyone tries to do that, because that would just be presumably indicative that somebody failed upstream that we shouldn't have allowed to get here. So I just want to know about that. But we'll get this asset. We know that the asset, in fact, now that I think about it, all this stuff is useless. I was thinking about that we were linking the other way around. So the next asset in the hash is just going to be whatever the head entry was, and then the head entry is going to be us. So that's it. There really isn't anything more complicated than that. The hash slot needs to come out of here, though. And that's it. So now we're just left with the problem I was talking about before, which is we don't really know how to build a tag hash from an asset. And so how this, I think, would have to work is if we look in here, we've got all this nonsense specified, but we've never actually loaded it. So this is the part that is going to be the problem for us, which is to say that we need to be able to find the tags that come, like the tags that this asset is actually using, right? I want to say this isn't really, we don't really need that anymore, do we? Because this doesn't matter anymore. Because it will just pick the closest one anyway, right? So I don't think this, I don't think this means anything anymore. So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna pull that match any flags stuff out of there for now. And if we need it for some reason later, you know, we can put it back in, but I'm gonna say that's not relevant, right? Like that just doesn't seem like that would be necessary. Anyway, so get asset hash slot here, this get asset from is presumably not able to find that because it's in, we didn't put it up in here. So that would need to be there. Fortunately, it's behind my head. There we go. And this is not a function anymore. Yeah. And so I think we're pretty much done with everything other than figuring out how we're going to update these tag hashes. So at the moment, like writing this particular function, now that I think about it, is actually trivial because we're expecting the assets to have this in there themselves. So really the problem was more that it's more how are we going to fill these out? Because they're expected to be filled out for any asset that we load in the first place, right? So that's a little trickier. Did someone in the chat just call this a VIM color scheme? This is... It's not Vim. It's for coder. See? Anyway, so the problem that we are going to have is not that we have to build it here because this is actually trivial, and in fact we probably didn't really need to do any of this, as this hash slot from nonsense actually can just go away. Because what we would do is we'd just get the asset like we were doing here, and then we would say, okay, the asset tag hash just gets passed directly from it, right? And the same thing would be true here because we know we're going to need the asset to compare at the end anyway. So what we would do is we'd just say, all right, you know, let's just do it like that, right? So it's pretty straightforward. We just call the function we had before. So the problem is actually not that. The problem is that in the two places where we add the asset to the hash, we need to go ahead and add asset to hash. In the two places that we add the asset to the hash, we need it to know about the, so here's one. We need the asset hash, tag hash to have been updated. So like this would be a place where we would need to do that, for example. And then we'd need to do the same thing in the importer. You know what I'm saying? So in both places, we need to make sure that the hash part is updated before we try to add this thing to the hash, because otherwise it'll just fail. Now, you can see here where we're pulling out the basic category by looking for that particular piece of information. So you can see that like that's stored as a tag value, right? And blah, blah, blah. But what we really need to do here is be a little bit more broad, right? So what we need to do here is we need to create a more coherent version of the, like probably by using like one of these, right? So this tag builder type thing is probably mostly what we would want here, right? We want to be able to push these tags on one after the other. And you can see here that we're actually storing the asset type as a thing. We probably should just take in the file and store the asset tag itself. Like, that would probably be the smarter thing to do anyway. Which is to say, like, we probably want to just store tag hashes so that when we load stuff out, we don't have tag sets. But since we have this entire system working already, it seems like just patching them here is probably the right thing to do for the immediate moment, right? If that makes sense. So if we look at the tag builder or something like that, we could use that here, for example, and push the tags on one at a time. So we could do something like this where we just said like tag builder, right? And we just look at the tags, and for each tag we would just, we'd just look and see if it's not one of the other things like facing direction or that sort of stuff, then we just set it in here, right? The only reason I don't think we want to do that is because I feel like we probably want this to be a little more generic than that. So we probably want to be able to push these tags into a thing that then kind of like regularizes them, if that makes sense. Because the other piece of code is going to have to do the same thing, right? So like in here, right, you can see it doing like the tags build on this thing. And we're going to need this to work in the same way. So you can see the tag builder thing where we do begin tags here. And it's doing this nonsense. So, you know, presumably we need that to work. Again, like I said before, I don't know, maybe we should just go full pull and change the asset file. If we were to look at the way these are done, you know, and we look at like the HHA header. So there's this tag count and the asset count. If we were just to say like these are going to go away now, so there are no tags, it's just an array of assets and annotations on the assets. And we had to imagine what was going to happen in there, and we just have these tag hashes, right? Then each asset, you know, would have the match vector, and it would have the tag, right? And that would be a much better way to do the file format. The problem is that it's not particularly flexible, right? Like the way we have it right now, where you can just stick as many tags on there as you want, is a little bit nicer. So I think we're just going to do this at import time. It's a little sloppy, but I think that would probably just be better. So I think what we probably want here is a thing that just takes the asset range and builds the tag hash from it. So when we have an add asset to hash, and only then. So when we actually add asset to hash, what I'm going to do is say at that time, we will rebuild the hash, like we'll rebuild what we expect to have happen there. So we'll have an asset match vector, and we'll have an asset tag hash, and we'll produce those two things. We will get the asset, we will like loop over the tags, and we will, I guess in here what we could also say is, so these are like the new hash, or maybe just, yeah, we'll just call it the hash, and the vector. So we'll just start out with these being nothing, right? And then at the end, we'll apply them. So we will set them in here. I'll name these the same as we're calling them on the outside. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll make a thing that just, when we add something to the hash, it does the refresh right there. So it loops through the tags and tries to do the right thing. What that also means is that if we go look at the import code, so, you know, that's an asset.cpp. Where is that? Right. Add asset to hash. So in here where it has to produce the type ID, now this is not necessary, right? So if something didn't have one of these, this is where it should complain. So this doesn't have to happen anymore, right? It would really be this, right? So what we want to do is assert that the type ID is not equal to 0, because that would mean that like the importer was broken or something. And then in here is where we would want to do the build. So you can see here that this is where we'll extract the type ID. This really probably, you know, wants to be a switch statement. So we would take this ID and we would switch on it. We know what we do in the case of basic category, where that's, you know, going to be where we're going to get the type ID from. But then we also have a couple other things that we expect to find and treat specially, right? So we know that tag variant is a thing that we're going to treat specially, and we know that tag facing direction is also a thing that we're going to treat specially. And so those are going to set elements of the match vector. Since we're, you know, playing around with this here, the tag array in the asset in the game assets type, right? Man, I really need this to tell me which one of these it is. Like, that is not helpful, right? You need to know which of these is the thing. Did I write that down? J needs to show which are forward declares. I'll send an email this after the stream. Because that's the way mine used to work, but when we switched over to like using the sort of merged one, it doesn't have that. So it's like I have no idea which of those is the forward declaration and which of those is the actual type declaration. So I'll be jumping all day and I never get there, right? It's like totally useless. So the what we want to do here is say, all right, we've got this tag array with the HHA tags in it, right? So let's pull that out so we can actually see it and reference it a little bit easier, right? So we're looking at this particular tag index, right? And then we can switch on the tag ID and we can use the value here to like basically decrypt these tags into something that we know how to work with. So we know we want facing direction to be pulled out like this, and we know we want variant to be pulled out like this, and then everything else, unless there's some tags that we want to like specifically avoid, so we're trying to like filter them out or something. But assuming that we actually want to have something specific go on here, what we would then do is say, all right, in that case, now we want to take any tag that's in here and add it to our list of tags. So we would have a asset tag ID tags. We know that this is only allowed to have 4, right? And we know that we've got our tag count, which we'd start with here. And so what we do here is say, look, we know that the tag count in this case has to be less than the tag size. In this particular case, what we really want to do is produce an error here. And we want to produce an error on the asset system. So what we probably want is not an assertion. We want like this, right? Like something like that. And And I don't know to what extent we want to actually print that, but, you know, we could do something like this. Right? I don't know. Yeah. So if we end up in a situation like this, where we have the source file name and all that stuff, like you can see here, right, and we've grabbed it, then what we probably want to do is say like invalid tag set or something. Right? And then what we could do is, since we don't really want this function to be doing something like printing an error from the inside, we can just say like errors, or, you know, had errors. Maybe we'll just call it result. In this case. And what we'll do is we'll say, like, look, in the case where, you know, any of these things didn't happen. So if the type ID is 0, we're going to complain about that. If we can't get the right number of tags, we're going to complain about that. And then we'll just assume we succeeded otherwise. Something like this. So assuming we can get this, what we'll do is we'll just say, like, okay, then for the tags, we will take the tag and we'll produce the rounded value of that tag. Or we don't have to round it. It's just whatever the tag ID actually is. And we'll throw away the value, right? When we're done, we know how to produce the tag hash. And in fact, now we don't really need that. So we know how to produce the tag hash because it's just get tag hash with the type ID of the asset and then the tags. Right? And since we don't want to have to know, we don't want to have to clear them at the end, we'll just clear them at the beginning to make it easier on ourselves since we don't care. So that adds to the hash, I believe, properly. We want to change it to have a Boolean return type, again, just for error reporting. And we probably want to report those errors at export time as well, or import time, I should say. So that seems relevant as well. So, or hold on a second, asset tag ID. Get tag hash in this case may be defined somewhere else. So I'm going to go ahead and move these up. I don't think get variant count should be happening anymore, so we should probably get rid of that as well. Conflict. Let's see. We don't need any of this anymore, so let's fix that. So source file, grid X, grid Y. We don't need any of these. We probably want asset index and file, maybe? Well, maybe we don't. I don't know. We'll just leave it like this for now. So is get variant count used anywhere? Because I don't think we would want that. Yeah, so this we recovered. We don't need to do that anymore. So that should be fine. So get variant count can go away as well. And things are looking relatively clean here. There's more we could do and probably more we should do, but we're closing in on this being relatively sane. Like I said, we may want an outf here where we do like report on there being something wrong with this asset. So, you know, something where we do like if not, there we go. And I think that was also done properly here, right? So if not, yeah. So if we can't add it to the hash for some reason, then we'll just say, you know, invalid tag set. And so now we've reported the error on import and on load. So in both places that could use it, we can tell the person that they screwed up when they define the tags in the tag file, right? And the reason I'm doing it that way instead of an assert is because if somebody in a tag file just types the wrong tags, we want to just report that so they can fix it. We don't want to just crash the program with an assert dialog or something, right? All right, so we have to now kind of step through this code and figure out what's not working. Surprisingly, that's actually more working than I would have expected. That's like quite a bit of working, actually. So it looks like the only thing that didn't really quite load properly, because even our little sprites look like they're loading properly, is the cube maps. Cube wrappings. They're not cube maps in the like lookup sense of the term cube map, but so that's surprisingly close. And it looks like the only thing that we weren't finding there was the so maybe in the gen code, like when we're generating rooms or whatever, we're putting together tag sets that don't like work properly for some reason, you know what I mean? So in the HHT, like if we imagine trying to find some of these things, like we've got like a cube, one of these like blocks, right? So if you imagine what a wall would have, right? It's wall, wood, and then man-made was like over here, right? Now, I don't know what the point of that is exactly. I guess I could kind of see why that is the way it is, because you're like, well, it's a wall versus a floor, and then it's like man-made or not, and then it's made out of this thing. But it seems like man-made is kind of like, are we outdoors or not? It's more of a primal thing. It really should be like maybe up at the top or something. Whereas like this part is like more specific. So I kind of almost feel like these are kind of in the wrong order a little bit. But even if we assume not, right? Also the wood versus stone bit like seems like it wants to be separate. So I do kind of feel like these are maybe a little bit wrongly ordered. Maybe, right? But that's why it was failing. So somehow all of our code probably worked correctly, and now it's just the order dependence of these, I guess. These tags are just not very good, so I don't really know how I want to deal with them, if that makes any sense. But yeah, if you look here, like if you're outdoors, it ends up being grass. It's just over-specified, right? Like, I almost just don't care about the man-made thing. It doesn't do anything. Like, it's just kind of dumb. You know what I mean? So, I kind of just want it to not be there because I'm not sure why you would ever care what it was. I guess to just to distinguish between, like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is like a wood floor, wood wall, you know? And maybe if you argued that you want to know man-made or not, as to whether or not, like a wall of wood. I mean, we don't even call it a wall of wood elsewhere, probably just because we were stupid. But, like, tree is just called tree. It's not a non-man-made wood wall, which is what a tree is, right? So I don't know. We should think about that harder at some point. For right now, I want to see what happens if we just say, this is not constructive. So we're getting rid of these for now. And we'll think about this a little harder later. And I think what we want to do is do this the opposite of the way that we were doing it. In the sense that what we really want is we want this code to have the tags lined up based on the way it's actually generating, indoors versus outdoors, wall versus floor, and then these tags should just correspond to which part of this code you're using, right? That's what I think should be happening, personally. So we'll take a look at that in a little bit, but... Okay. So we have to kind of look at assets a little bit here, which I'll be completely honest, I don't really remember much about how this stuff works. It's been so long since we've looked at any of this stuff in terms of like assets and all sorts of things like that. So I don't really know anymore. Like we've got like sort of asset inspection and stuff on here, but I don't think that I don't know if that works if the asset doesn't exist, right? It probably gets knopped out. So we can't, unfortunately, look at assets that didn't actually, like, get matched. So, what I think I want to do is step through that code. I don't even know basic stuff anymore because we haven't done this in so long. I don't know if I need to, like, ask it to rebuild or if it would automatically rebuild because of the fact that the asset files have changed. I think... we do it manually. So it may also be that all I really have to do here is do like a reload. You can see here like reload. So what I might do is try that. Because it may be that we just want to do a reload and a save and that's it, because we don't automatically update. I think we consciously decided not to do that because we wanted to like be able to do a reload to refresh. And then we wanted to save only if we thought that it worked properly, right? So doing a reload of the HHTs doesn't seem to have done anything, right? So we do have to kind of step through and debug this and figure out what is going on there, right? Because it doesn't look like anything actually happened. And you can see it incrementing the load number and nothing actually occurs. So I do think that actually... it did whatever updating it was going to do, and we don't see any difference here. So I'm going to do a save on that to save the HHTs, and it looks like no changes. So I don't know if that means that it did actually load the HHTs automatically when we ran the game. I guess it did, because we definitely changed them. So I don't know. So I guess we just have a matching error there, and so what we need to do now is go find out what's wrong. Right? Okay, so we know we're trying to match like wall wood, for example, right? And what you see here is that when we come through this thing, and we say on wall, add the wall, add the wood, or floor in this case, and then wood or stone. Right, or grass. All of those tags look right, and then we're saying, okay, we want to add a piece here, which is a cube piece, and we want to do a scenery asset, and we want to do this set of tags from the tag builder that we made here, right? And so we expect that to have just worked, because it should have just built something that matches like floor wood or something. And off we go. Our question is, why didn't that happen? And one question I have is, I guess I don't know about whether these are set to scenery. I assume they must be because of block, So I'm assuming that block automatically sets that. And so what I probably want to do here is just step through the match, probably, and find out why we're not matching any assets. So what I probably want to do for this is, the easiest place to start would be in the entity rendering code where we actually push a cube on, to look at what the tags were that were actually trying to be matched in the first place, and then maybe back that out and go look at when we actually did the matching, right? And so in this case, so you can see us pushing a cube on here. So we should be able to just say, look, it's going to be having been this call for the bitmap asset. Let's start here and just see what the piece even has on it at all. And we'll go from there. For some reason, I am not able to set a breakpoint there, which doesn't make a lot of sense. What is the reasoning behind that? So for some reason, this doesn't let me set any breakpoints. Is that just a Remedy problem? What's the deal there? I feel like George was here, wasn't he, at some point? George, you happen to know what's going on there? I wonder what we're doing wrong. This is a debug build, right? So it should have full access to all the debug information, but it looks like no such luck. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I wonder if this is... Oh, we need 313. All right. We can update our remedy. I don't know if I have a later version of Visual Studio, but let's just see. Let's make sure. I don't think I updated, but let's just make sure about that. Okay, so let me grab a remedy from itch.io, which always has like the worst user interface for getting stuff you already own. Let's grab remedy and save it to okay. So I've grabbed a new version of Remedy. And let's find out if that is our problem. I mean, sure, you can save the session. So let's grab the 314597. Let's grab the latest action. And we'll go ahead and drop that in here. And we'll see if we can breakpoint. So in, I guess I don't really need these anymore. So back in the same code, I'm just going to try and set a breakpoint in exactly the same place. And if it works this time, then it does look like it was updated VC debug information. Yep, that looks like what it was, because that set just fine. Weird. I guess they changed it, huh? Is that what happened? I should probably also update my work computer with that. I haven't run into that. I tend to keep things very old on my work computer. Like, I don't plug it into the internet. I don't update the software because stuff usually works if you don't update it. When you update, things break. Like that, right? Because you have, it's like Visual Studio decides to update something, like new debug info, and then all your tools that used to work with the old debug info won't work anymore. And you're like, thanks for that. Why did you do that? And usually the answer is no reason other than weird internal organization garbage, because there's never any new features or anything. Like, they don't actually improve anything. They just change the debug format and make everyone's lives difficult. Anyway, so let's see what happened here. So we're assuming this bitmap ID is 0, right? Because it won't have found anything. And so what we want to do now is look and see, like, are we asking for the right tags? Before we start investigating the asset system to see, like, what's wrong, we want to see if, like, the asset hash itself has something filled out sensibly. So here's a randomized variant value. That's what we would expect to see. In here, we've got a packed hashtag, right? You can see it here. And we'd like a way to be able to decrypt that if we can. So let's just take a look at the getTagHash function, and you can see us packing this stuff in here. So if we look, the like asset category is in the bottom 8 bits of this thing. So if we take a look at what's in the bottom 8 bits of this thing, it's like 1/8 hex. Right? It's that. Which I don't even know what value that is. It's 24, apparently. And if we... That's not what I wanted. So if we take a look at which of these in the basic category we're talking about, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, it's exactly what we would expect. I suppose I probably could have done this, huh? Can I? In Remedy? So I guess I can't. Not even sure what that's doing. That's a bit wonky. So I was just going to see if it would tell me the name of this thing. If I cast something to it. But it doesn't look like it. That would be a nice feature to have if there's a Remedy feature request. But it is correctly asking for asset scenery. And then we've got these other ones. So like from 8 to... So if we shift down 8, I mean, we know exactly what we're doing here, right? We shift down 8 and then we mask off the 14 bits that are there. We should be able to, you know, look at the other values as well. So the piece hash... if we actually take a look at this and we look at it more specifically, so we shift it down by 8, we're looking at just this portion now. It just so happens that this is a 0 value out here anyway, so it looks like OX12 is like the next tag in the set. So what would that be? And I don't know. Is that plausible, right? So like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So that's floor, right? So these do seem to be, I mean, they seem to be built correctly, right? Like it's looks like it's using the right hash value for all intents and purposes, right? Let's just double check the last one. So if we shift it down 22, it's 19. So that would be floor grass. So floor grass is a totally valid thing to expect to see. Would be this. And honestly, though, you know, that one thing that does concern me a little bit about that. So suppose we keep going here. Just looking at is, you know, the grass part seems to be there, actually. Doesn't it? So floor grass is looking up properly because, hey, look at that. There's often the area where the lighting is like out of bounds because you can't see over here at the moment. But if I zoom over there at the debug camera, it looks like floor grass is kind of there, potentially. I don't know for sure, but I mean, it's not completely missing. It's not zeroed. So that makes me a little bit nervous because then it's like, okay, so floor grass works, but floor wood does not. That's a bit strange, right? And that suggests almost that the tags weren't actually updated or something because this one we didn't change, I don't think. So the one we didn't change is looking at properly. The one we did change isn't. I don't want to call that a problem yet. But, I mean, so one thing, too, is, like, let's suppose we compile in release mode real quick. And, like, hopped over there. Yeah, I mean, that looks like it's there, right? It's really weird. All right. What's going on with that? That is some weird stuff. So actually, no. That does not work because that's where floor grass would actually be. These are actually places that got filled in. That's in the like landfill section thing, right? Apron, the apron code. So in the apron code, aha. That's the problem. These are blocks, not scenery. Okay, lesson learned. I forgot how our own code works. This happens all the time when you only program once a week on something. So actually, that may be most of it. I don't know. Oops. So this right here, where we're doing asset scenery placement, this would have to be asset block, actually. And now it could find it, because it was looking for the wrong type of asset. And we're still a little screwed. You can see, like, there's some weird thing that happens as soon as we start going, like, the lighting dies somehow, right? So there's something still really weird happening there at the moment. So I have no idea what that problem is, but some kind of weird, like, feeding a NAND into the system kind of a thing, right? Furthermore, our hero sprite is gone, so that's also wrong. So, like, bodies and heads look like they're not being looked up properly either. But the glove is, and the ground is now. And so we only have a few issues going on here. I don't know what's going on with that lighting bug, though. That's like a weird... Something must be getting fed in that's, like, highly erroneous and poisoning the system. Especially, it's especially weird because it only happens when we move. Like, the lighting is running as it should right now. And then moving... well, I guess not moving, just changing facing direction. Was it? Okay, now I'm super confused. What caused that? Because that was a really bizarre bug. Something caused that. All right. So we still got some weird bugs going on here, which is to be expected when we change this much stuff. But we got to go find out what's happening. So let's take a look at the tag files. I guess that's the HHT files. For things like body hero, it's orphan hero is what's in there. And then it's got like facing direction tags on it. But I think that's the only other thing that it has on it, right? So orphan hero with an asset type of body is what we would expect for creating the player, right? Like we want to actually create a player in the world. So here's the function for add player, and you can see it doing the piece asset thing. It's calling change hash to take like the orphan hero hash and modify it. My guess is like the change hash function probably just doesn't work. Like we probably just like threw that in there and it's broken, right? So if we look and see how this works, you can see the basic category here. It's saying get tag hash by passing the type and then whatever the source piece asset's original hash was. So that code probably isn't broken, but this code probably is. So this right here, right? It doesn't look particularly broken to me. I can't say I know what would be wrong about that. So, I mean, you're just taking the category and you're ORing it into this other tags system, and you're knocking out everything but the bottom 8 bits, which is exactly what you need to OR in there. So, you know, that doesn't seem particularly suspicious, does it? I mean, seems like what you would expect. So hard to think about where that would be going pear-shaped, you know? Doesn't seem super plausible that that's broken. So it would be nice to know. It would be nice to know if those tags were wrong or right. There's a sort of separate thing here that I'm thinking about as well that's worth noting. So I'm going to point it out. So if we just said that the asset basic category is just another tag ID, you know what I'm saying? Then this whole thing would be a lot more straightforward. It would just be the category would be the first tag, and then off you would go. I want to debug this first, but I think the next thing I want to do is just get rid of basic category altogether, and it's just another tag. So if you want to say that something's a block, you just put block as the first tag, right? And that could be automatically added by the asset system. So it could just automatically include that thing as the first tag always. So you don't have to do it. It's the same thing. But the code on the inside doesn't think about basic categories as being special. Because they're not. Asset type is special. Like, is it a sound or a bitmap? That we actually have to know about. But basic category doesn't mean anything. Like, it's just a texture one way or the other. We don't care what the category is, right? So I do think that probably wants to get replaced. But that still doesn't answer the question of why these tags aren't being matched here. And so what I'd like to do is take a look at why that's happening. So let's go ahead over to Debug Build and just step through and see like what is going on with the body, head, hat, all that stuff. Why is that not working? Like, what's the problem? And I don't know. So what is the problem? If we... Maybe I'll go into that add player function. Maybe this is the best way to do it. So when we add the player, we'll just look at what the individual pieces are that end up getting looked at. So, you know, if we look through here, let's look at like the hero tags. So here's the hash value. And as expected, like the bottom is 0. And then we've got OX26 and OXA are probably the two things. So let's just act, but you know, let's actually do these correctly. So there's the first tag, and there's the second tag. So it's actually not. It's shifted up differently. Sorry. So if we want to know what OX26 and OX28 are, they're 38 and 40. So looking at the asset tag ID, oops, 38 and 40, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 36, 37, 38, and 40. So we're producing the correct tags for that. So OX26 and OX28 are the correct, you know, hero tags. When we go do body piece, let's just see if that hash is then the same hash value, only with the bottom bits modified. And so you can see it is. So it's just the OA got inserted there, which is exactly what we would expect. And for OXOA, the only question is 10, right, the right asset type for this, you know? And so let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, like, it seems to be asking for the correct piece. So the only thing I can think of is that somehow, so unless something more subtle is going wrong, like the tags that are built for this thing, like, aren't working, the only other thing I can think of is, like, is the matching code borked, right? So when we do the load asset, although if it was, how would the glove be working, right? That's the only thing. Like, if we run this, what we see is that we do have something where facing direction is working, the glove, right? So if we change the facing direction of the glove, you can see that it actually does pick a facing direction for the glove. At least it doesn't, the downward glove doesn't pick the correct one, but all the rest appear to. So it is picking a facing direction for the glove, just not the hero. So what's going on there? Like, let's look for some clues. So if we were to look at the body data file, this is it, right? And so there is other stuff in here. We don't know, you know, we don't load those at all at the moment. Here's the glove data file, right? And they line up in the sense that these are the same inputs for all intents and purposes, right? So the only question is, like, okay, so our body and hand, is there something like materially different happening in there, right? And there might be. I don't know. Oh. Well, there actually might be. So let's take a look at where asset body is used. In the importer, which is here. What very well may be happening is these. And yeah, so it's the other things, you can see these things getting added, right? The tag attack and stuff like that. So actually, probably what's happening is this case 1 here. So 0 is idle, 1 is dodge left and right, 3 is move, hit, attack, 1 and 2. But actually, so in anything in case 0, tag idle is being added. That's probably the problem. Actually. Right? So let's just not do that. Let's just not do that. Because if tag idle's not there, then I think that would work. Because tag idle is probably what's producing the problem. Now, we could shove tag idle on there, but I don't think we want to do that. So for dynamic tags, we would probably do something slightly different than this. So we're probably going to want to fix this, actually, eventually, but, you know, just not right now. But that's probably the only issue, would be my guess. Is it's just there's tags on there that we don't want. Yep, that's exactly what it was. And so I don't really know what happens with that load thing that occurs there. It looks like it's probably just because things get reloaded because the tags changed. And when you actually go and save them, you won't have that happen. So my guess is this is just because of like tag reloading or something, right? And once all the tags have been straightened out, then you're good. That's my guess anyway. Okay, so head is probably the same problem, right? So in here, it's probably the same thing. This wants no tag to be added. And off you go. Yeah. So then I think we're all good. I think. It's really interesting. So now I'm just wondering, like, yeah, so if I go in here and do reload, save, it says no changes. So what is that? What is that weirdness? It's like if I change the facing direction, there's some kind of weird like load time bug there that we need to fix. With the lighting that I don't know what is, I have no idea what is actually causing it. But there's some kind of like weird like submission error, like a texture that doesn't get submitted properly or something like that, right? And I just don't know. I don't know what it is. But we're almost there, and as we clean up more of this, it should be easier for us to find those problems anyway. Let me take another look at some of the stuff. So facing direction-wise, let's take a look at facing direction. In the generator real quick, not in base game. Entity world gen, probably this. So when we add orphan here and we're doing this stuff, I kind of want to make our orphans, fix our orphans. You can see us adding orphan to this, right? We're adding the tag orphan, but we don't specify like which orphan it is. It's this, I guess, is the problem, which we're not using. So I feel like what we want to do here, and also if you look at this, when we're doing our entity work, you can see here like these things get added to the result tags, and I'm not sure that check this room to see if it meets other criteria. So we add the orphan tag, we add the name tag, and then we return that result, the gen entity, right? And I guess the only thing I'm kind of confused about is that what? Why wouldn't that work? It should, shouldn't it? Should it? Well, actually, no. So, how does it know? Like, where does it add like body and head and stuff? Right? Uh. So it calls the add orphan function, right? So where is that? So it calls the add orphan function when it wants to actually do this. It uses the two things it gets passed from base asset, which should have been right, I think. And it adds those pieces in here. So I feel like that should probably work, at least in theory. So that, why is this not working is the only thing I want to kind of finish up on. So is this somehow wrong? Like, is it not orphan with the name tag? Is that not working for some reason? Like, why is that not working? So I'm going to break in that function just because I want to see like what it actually produces for the tag set there. And then we'll go from there. So in add orphan, let's go ahead and run. And we'll just see what this is actually adding, because I have no idea. Like, what's in base asset, for starters, right? Like, what did that actually entail? And in fact, we can even look at this a little bit easier, because we assume these functions are working properly now. So if we look at the thing that made this piece hash, like where this was actually created, you can see that it's calling this like pending entity tags bit. So if I just look at pending entity tags, that should tell me like what this was supposed to have in it, right? So it's supposed to have orphan baby, and that feels like it should work, right? Orphan baby and then nothing afterward. And so when it calls, when it smushes that down, you know, well, I mean, we can double check, but it should have produced orphan baby as the two pieces here as well. So, you know, and 26 OX26 is orphan, and presumably 9C is baby. So it sure seems right. So I don't know why those aren't being found. So that's like a little weird, because in the HHT, all of those should be there, right? So like orphan baby is right here. There's the body. And so we'd at least see the body, and the head should also be here as well. Right there it is. Just saw it. So it's really kind of a little confusing. I don't get it. I do not get it. Maybe we'll save this for next weekend. Maybe. Yeah, so I don't know why it's not finding that. Because, again, we removed the idle from the body import. So in theory, that shouldn't be there anymore, right? And, you know, and maybe it still is, and maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. But let's save that for next time, and we'll kind of continue down this road. For now, we'll do brief Q&A, and we'll go from there. So a question about reading K&R to learn C, and the question is, do you think I should be able to solve all the exercises one by one, or could I skip them and continue with the text and get back to them later? For example, before chapter 1, there's an exercise to remove comments from a C program, and I'm having trouble to solve it at this stage. So I would say, yeah, there's two things to say about that. One would be that, in my experience, exercises in books should have been written so that you should do them all, because practice is very important. But my recollection from most programming books that I've read is that the exercises are not particularly well architected to actually guarantee that you could possibly solve them at that stage. And more importantly, at the point where you are trying them, it doesn't offer the right kind of help to like get you to be able to solve them. So I think what I would probably say is try the exercises, but if one of them seems like way too hard, then definitely skip it and try to come back to it later, because I don't think that most programming books, especially ones that are that old, but even today, they usually don't have particularly well thought out exercises. So it's entirely possible that there's an exercise in there that's like way too difficult for the level of programming that you would be at if you'd read the book up to that point. That's probably quite common. Do you think that possibly optional memory safety features are desirable to have in a language, or should it be the programmer's job? I guess what I would say is I don't really think... So I have two things to say about that. The first one is that 99% of all memory safety features that people talk about only exist because the way that people write code is bad. So the idea that you just malloc tons of stuff and then like write around or whatever is just a terrible way to program. And so there's tons of like memory errors that occur because the way that the programs were written was bad. Having a bunch of stuff in your language to try to paper over that problem isn't interesting to me and is kind of a waste of time. So things like Rust or whatever are kind of just garbage in my opinion, and I don't think they have any real future other than if people continue to pursue poor programming practices, then maybe languages like Rust are interesting because they try to help you not be as bad at bad programming. That said, there are actual things that languages can do that can make it much easier for you to catch errors that you will have in programs that are not written exceedingly poorly. So just because lots of memory checking stuff only applies to very poor ideas about programming in the first place doesn't mean there aren't plenty of memory errors that aren't about bad programming, that were about, actually trying to program something properly, but then, it's just hard. And usually what those boil down to is indexing problems. And indexing problems in C are very difficult to check for because it requires you to manually add assertions everywhere and go through like helper functions to like check to see that the indexing that you're doing is proper. There are definitely features languages could add to make those things work better. And obviously some languages already have the ability to do more robust index checking. And they do that, unfortunately, by requiring you to use certain types that do that index checking for you, right? So one could imagine a better language would be one that allows the user to construct types that get the same kind of compile time checking for indexing use that a built-in type would have in a language that forces you to use their built-in types to get the memory checking that you wanted, right? So there's definitely things languages could do. Some languages are doing them. Most aren't. And most languages focus on problems that you just wouldn't have if you weren't using already bad ideas in that language, right? That's about all I could say. Would you like to participate in our regular competition for JavaScript and TypeScript developers? Prize fund $100. Okay, I'd just like to point out the fact that, like, I don't know of, like, anywhere, maybe if you specifically went to a country whose currency was economically depressed, maybe you could find... No, I still don't think you could. I simply don't think it's possible to find a game engine developer who would ever think it was worth it to do anything for $100. Game engine developers get paid fantastically large amounts of money to do what they do. $100 is absolutely absurd. Like, that's a ridiculous number to throw out for a prize fund for game engine developers. I don't even know what to say. Not trying to be snooty, it's just like, come on, man. What game engine developer is ever going to want to participate in a competition for $100? It's nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Do you think that using void star as some blank data is good? Okay, sorry. I can't quite translate this sentence exactly. Do you think that using void star as blank data is good practice? For example, if you have somewhat generic struct called item, and then based on what item type it is void star points to different struct. Okay, I think maybe I understand what you're saying. Are you just saying, do you think void pointer, like, do you think having a typeless pointer is useful? Not particularly often. So I do think occasionally you need pointers that point to something where you don't know what it is, and then later you turn it into something that you do know what it is. It's kind of a way to do things that have like some polymorphic or pass-through things to it. So, like, for example, in C++, sometimes people will make an inheritance hierarchy to do what you're talking about. I do think void star is useful in certain circumstances, but I don't tend to use it that often. So it's a relatively rare thing to do, but there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to make sure that you actually want that exact behavior. I will oftentimes, rather than that, use unions. So I'll put a discriminated union in there. And the main reason for that is because a void star... So there's a difference between a void star and a discriminated union. In both cases, someone needs to know the type of the thing eventually, or they can't do anything with it. So in both cases, you probably have an enum that says, like, what is the thing? The reason that I tend to like the union case more than the void star case is because it tends to be, if you put all of your stuff together in a union and then use the enum to say which one of the things you're actually storing, you know that you'll automatically get a nice uniformly sized chunk that you can work with in memory very easily. Like, void star is usually about, I don't want to ever waste some memory here, use it for things that I don't use, and that's why I didn't make a union, right? But most of the time, I find that it's better to make everything be a uniform size, even if there's some wastage, because then you can make your memory allocation and clearing and organization all work with fixed known sizes, and that's just usually like way more efficient. And the little bit of wastage that you tend to have in those cases is actually just fine, because memory is usually not what you care about. You just care about cache, right? So typically, it just really doesn't matter. The one other thing I'd say is that in the case where it does matter, so when I actually get to a point where I do need to know this, that implies that it's a very high throughput thing where the cache would matter. And in that case, void star is usually also not the right decision, because usually what you want to do is have segregated lists by type and then just go straight over the list without having to do any tests at all, right? So typically, that's why you don't see me using the void star thing and then change it into a real type later at some later point. That's why you don't see me do that very often, is because it's usually just not the right answer to any particular problem. But that said, once in a while it is. So I don't want to make it sound like you never use it. It's just most of the time, discriminated union or separate arrays of type by type, those are usually preferable solutions to that solution. And by the way, those two things are usually preferable solutions to the inheritance hierarchy solution as well. So typically, the most common thing that people do, which is inheritance hierarchies or something similar, is almost always wrong. I'll just go out and say it's always wrong. It's never the right solution to the problem. Either discriminated union or separate lists of identical types is usually the correct solution to either of those two. And that maybe, hopefully, will give you some clarification there. Do game engines use a common library to import assets from, say, Maya and Blender? Well, I guess they don't all use a common library, but they usually do license that from somebody, whether it's an open source thing or like a commercial thing. In fact, I did one of the main commercial ones that is used today, which is this. So this is I guess over 5,000 titles use this, apparently. This is one that I wrote, and it does that. So it imports from like Max and Maya and stuff like that. And tons and tons and tons of people use that. There's at least some open source ones. I don't know, like Collada was one at one time. I honestly don't know. Like, I think Autodesk now ships like a Filmbox one. Like this thing. It's from Autodesk, so it's almost certainly horrible because every piece of software they ever ship is horrible. But like it's there, right? So this is another example of one that people might use. I don't know to what extent people do use it, but it's there. And I'm sure there are others. I don't know what they are, right? What's your design chat with John, which was really cool. Are you moving into designing the gameplay for Handmade Hero? No, Handmade Hero, like, I mean, we are doing that now, but Handmade Hero, like, I don't really plan to do much in the way of game design for it. It's not that kind of thing, right? It's just was to make the engine, which is basically done. So we're just going to put some stuff in there so you can play it, and then that's the end of it, right? But the reason I was asking John was just because of some Star Code Galaxy stuff I was doing, and I was just curious. It was sort of a separate, sort of spare time thing I was thinking of. If I wanted to make a game with modding interface or a lot of items, how should I go about it? In both cases, union-based polymorphism that you just described doesn't seem the best solution. I mean, the question you have to ask yourself is, in what way do you expect this thing to be modded, right? If you want things to be modded, then you have to ask what level of modding is happening. Do you expect people to be like shipping DLLs that do their own like processing so you can really have very flexible changes to what's going on? Or are you expecting people to do things more like provide pseudo script sort of things that expect the back end of the game engine to do stuff like figure out how these things are stored or whatever, right? And in terms of how you adapt to that with your code internally, I guess what I would say is I'd still absolutely go the union route. That would absolutely be what I would do. And what I would do is I would just say, well, at startup time, all of the mods are just queried for how large their stuff is, and we just guarantee blocks of that size, right? And I might go so far as to also do the other way, because if I was going to bother with that system, I would say, well, at that point, because the mod system, people are just adding all of this stuff to it, I now know that I will probably have to spend some time doing work with the mod system to support that. What I might do is switch to go to the more efficient way anyway and just say, okay, in that case, everything's its own array. And I expect the mod to basically, it only operates on its array of stuff. That's probably what I would do, right? So if I was doing modding, I would probably pre-do like segregated arrays of uniform types, right? Do you remember reading a book about Win3 to begin? Yeah, it was Petzold was the first one I read. Do you already have something on your agenda after you finish Handmade Hero? Well, I mean, I already have like, 3 separate projects I'd have to do for my day job. So I'm not sure what you mean, like, have something on my agenda after finish Handmade Hero. Handmade Hero is just something I do on the weekend. All right, that looks like about it. So I think we're more or less done with our asset tag port, which is great. And now it's just a question of like finishing like the debugging and then maybe going through a little bit of cleanup in just how we use the tags, because now that we kind of know what we're doing, I think we can sort of like clean that stuff out, right? And just kind of like say, okay, now we're good. We've got a coherent strategy. This is how tags work. All the assets will just be tagged this way, and off we go, right? So that's about it. I'll be back here next weekend to continue on that. If you go to handmadehero.org, it's got all the stuff. It says what the schedule is, obviously, and also if you want to follow along with the source code at home, you can always pre-order the game, and it comes with the source code, so you can download it day by day and follow along with me as I code. Also, we've got the episode guide is going now. You can click this little full screen button. And if you want to look at past episodes, it's pretty handy, right? You can look at stuff. Oh, where does Casey do like SIMD programming or whatever? And you can say, oh, let's see what he says about this or whatever, and it'll jump right there. And you can watch like any part of like an old part of Handmade Hero really easily, right? It also has other stuff on there that's pretty good now. Like, for example, there's if you go up to this little window, there's other stuff. It's got the Handmade. Are they in the Handmade chat? Well, they used to be here. The Handmade. There's the Handmade Con stuff that was in here before. I don't know. I thought it was in here. Miblo, where did it go? I don't know where it is. So I don't know where Handmade Con stuff went. But it was on here. And so I guess I'll have to find out where it actually went. I don't maintain the guide. Miblo maintains the guide. So I don't really remember like how to get those. Let me see. Are they just on here? Is it that you can't highlight them from the thing? Yeah, it does seem that way. So there they are, right? Here's all the Handmade Con stuff. So like if you want to go see like Ron Gilbert's interview, right? So I don't know why it's not there. I'll have to ask Miblo. You can see it kind of like does a weird thing here where you can't, I don't know how you get back. So I'll have to ask him about that. But there's the 2 Handmade Con sets too as well. So check that out if you haven't, and if you're interested in old video stuff, this is by far the best way to get at it. It's a lot better than trying to go through it on YouTube directly yourself. Using the YouTube link's only really good if you want to like subscribe to be notified. Like if you subscribe on here, it'll notify you like when the new videos are posted, and that's useful. But finding old episodes on YouTube, their search is crappy. This is way better. So if you're looking for a particular old episode, this is definitely the place to do it. All right, that's about it. I have nothing else to say right now. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy, everybody.